Hey, welcome back to the channel, everyone. I have a very special guest with me today. This is Andrew Monteith. Andrew debated PF in Washington, where he qualified to the TOC, and then ramped up his debating a little bit in college, where he attended Bates and competed in American parliamentary debate as well as British parliamentary debate. In his time competing in college, he was third at everything, third at Team of the Year, third Speaker of the Year, third at Nationals, and second at a bunch of things too, like the North American Championship, Yale, runner-up at Harvard, etc., along with a bunch of other, champion top speaker awards, etc. So a very decorated debater that we have here, and also a pretty decorated coach now. Now that he has graduated from Bates, he's been coaching a variety of styles of debate, including public forum. So happy to have you here with us, Andrew, and excited to discuss debate with you.
Yeah, excited to be here as well, and of course to catch up. Sorry about my voice, by the way. I am a bit sick, so some of the congestion may come through.
No worries at all. So I'll start with a few questions just like about your experience in debate. First one, what got you into debate in the first place?
Yeah, well, so high school, my school didn't really have a team. There was like basically two people who did it, and one of those people's partner dropped last minute, so I did some random local PF tournament. I think the topic was about like gun bans or something. I don't remember. I just remember really
Universal
enjoying it.
background checks, it must have been.
Yes, universal background check. See, you were way more into PF than I ever was, but
Bro,
regardless, I just remember
I learned
enjoying it because I was like
weighing
a
was
bad
that
student.
tournament.
What'd you say?
I learned the word weighing on that topic. So I don't know
I
I don't
probably
know if
didn't learn the word weighing until like a couple tournaments later, to be
fair enough,
honest.
fair enough. But
But
sorry,
yeah,
continue. I interrupted.
oh, you're good. I mean, I don't know. It was just enjoyable. I was a pretty bad student. Like I liked reading and stuff, but I was really bad at school. So I was in this environment where people would like praise me for doing well, even if I didn't do things the way other people did. So my block file was like a OneNote page for like really like I qualified to the TOC out of like a OneNote page or whatever as well. Like I really genuinely had no idea what I was doing, but it was like as long as you would win, people would not like criticize you. So it was really cool for me. Yeah. And
True.
I just sort of enjoyed it. I went to college in part because I wanted to pursue debate. I ended up at Bates and then got way more into it in college. I just think it's way more fun. But yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I guess like what was your experience debating in APTA? Well, first of all, like how was the transition? What caused this sudden uptick in interest in the activity?
So I don't know why I went into college with such a strong idea that I would do debate because even looking back at high school, it was not like who I was, and it still isn't. Like it's definitely not like a part of my identity per se. But the transition into APTA was a bit difficult because it's a very different format. And I transitioned during COVID year when the league was super small and a lot of institutional knowledge had been lost. And because the activity is primarily student run, despite being like sort of, at least in my opinion, sort of more or less the top of the college activities you can do, it's really difficult if you go to a small school, for example. You can just show up and no one knows what they're doing all of a sudden. Like the last person who was good at APTA graduated 3 years ago. There's no written records. The school email got deleted, so they lost all their cases, that sort of thing, right? So transitioning was really difficult. And definitely one of the things I like now is that when I go back and judge and coach APTA, you can see people are having a much easier time transitioning in because the league is, I think, regrown quite a bit and a lot of institutional knowledge is coming back. But yeah.
Nice. Yeah,
Part of
what
my transition was because of Perry too. Um, I found someone else there, Mr. Beckett, Peregrine Beckett, who did LD in high school quite successfully, and we were partners. So definitely, I think we both like pushed each other to care about the activity because every time we like went 3-2, we were both like, ah, like how can we let this happen? We're like better than this, and that was like the motivation for a while to like improve, I suppose.
Fair enough, fair enough. And Perry will be a guest on this channel later at some point when we figure out our schedules as well. So
Lovely. He'll have some interesting perspectives because he started like debate business, etc.
yeah, yeah. Oh man, I'm quite excited for that as well. Okay, last question about your experience in debate, before we get to some more interesting sort of
Yeah.
take, is you started coaching recently. What has your experience been with coaching? And yeah, like how has it been, for example?
Yeah, so I've coached middle school through college. I haven't been coaching like super competitive like high schoolers, like people who are like bidding, but I did coach some pretty competitive middle schoolers at my previous job, both Parley and PF, and then just like generally high schoolers and college students. I think I think it showed me a few things. The first is that it's really interesting how an activity that's so large can have such like a poor understanding of itself. Like there's hundreds of thousands of people who do high school debate. I would argue like less than 1% of those people ever actually like sit down and really sort of like think through like what debate even is or like what we're doing or what it means to win and lose, not just in terms of like results on tab room, but sort of like to the game, like what that represents as a result within the game. I also think that PF and high school debate in the US in general seems like it's in a really bad place, in my opinion, to be honest. I have not really enjoyed the perspective of PF I've regained, and it has given me a much larger newfound appreciation for both international formats like BP and World Schools, which traditionally I've sort of disliked, but also just like American formats like APDA that have a heavier emphasis on like warrant quality. It's sort of radicalized me. I never thought I would be to the truthier side of truth over like talk over truth, but suddenly I'm like, I guys, like, this has gone too far.
True.
So yeah.
It's kind of horrifying hearing like APTA be held up as the golden example of warrant quality.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
but certainly I agree with you, like relative to a lot of the debate that I'm seeing on the national circuit in PF these days, does seem like there's
Yeah.
certainly a lack of standards when it comes to warrant quality.
I
Um,
think one of the new perspectives I've gained as someone who's not a competitor at all anymore, but as an educator, is I do think a lot of like the educational value of debate can be lost at a certain point, when you become like too much of an emphasis on just like spinning cards and spinning like pre-written strategies, largely because I think one of the best things debate does is just like raw critical thinking skills. And I do think I've noticed that, obviously due to a lot of other like factors like AI, for example, that this is sort of at an all-time low, I think, among kids. And I think this may be to an extent reflected in debate formats as well, to be honest. But
yeah, Loki, the hot take no one is ready for is paraphrasing good.
yeah, paraphrasing is 100% good in my opinion. It does like people have this like misconception, I think, that just because you're quoting directly, your like evidence ethics are like good or better, but you could misrepresent a piece of evidence to an equal degree, paraphrasing or not paraphrasing, right? Like the delta is whether or not you actually have to like put the information in your own words and like understand the source as opposed to like they can see, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I sympathize with this perspective quite a lot. This is actually a great transition into some of the questions that I wanted to ask you. So you've already talked about this a little bit, but do you have any other like opinions on public forum, either as an event sort of inherently or as an event circumstantially in its current version?
I mean, I have a ton of opinions on pretty much everything, I think. Debate is certainly no exception. Um, I think I don't know. I do think that like it will be interesting to see whether or not PF continues in this sort of like entropic trend in the same way other formats did. Like LDR policy just got more and more janky and more janky to the point where it's like they're kind of like beyond the pale now. They're like extraordinarily esoteric. They have a really hard time attracting new people because of like, they have a ridiculously high, not just skill ceiling, but also skill floor. And I'll be interested to see if public forum keeps going in that direction where it really just does become like policy light, or if there is some sort of course correction where you get the return of slightly more traditional debate, more like weighing, less pre-fiat arguments, more like emphasis on just one voter and final focus, more paraphrasing, that sort of thing. And I think, to be completely honest, I think that's the only way for the format to survive. I think a format where the longest speech is 4 minutes and the majority of judges are lay or flay literally like structurally cannot support case and theory. So I just think that like if we keep having this like arms race to more efficient, well, pre-fiat ballots, the format will collapse. And then there's a reason why NSDA is pushing for world schools right now, right? I think it's because they recognize they need a format that stays more or less the same every single 5 years, no matter who comes and does it or breaks the format or whatever. And that is sort of the interesting thing I think about really technical high school debate, right? It's like the thing that makes it the most interesting, the fact you can totally break it and gamify it, is also what gives it the shortest shelf lifespan, right? Because LD in like 2015 is not LD in 2008. These are like different games effectively, right? But what else is like that? Like basketball is not like that. Like other sports aren't like that. Like mock trial or whatever these dumb other like things that people do aren't like that. So,
Yeah,
um,
it's true. I'm trying to
uh,
think of comparisons in my own mind. I am a lack for them. Maybe like GeoGuessr.
poker. Poker, maybe GeoGuessr. Poker is another interesting one. Poker is like massively changed because of computers and AI and solvers.
Oh,
So the way you play poker in 2020 is very different than you do in 2004, for example. But even then, I don't think it's like yeah,
yeah,
comparable.
I feel like it's not the total reset that we seem to have at least every decade in PF.
Yeah, exactly.
It really
Yeah.
is. It seems like a completely foreign activity when you go back far enough.
Oh,
Um,
100%. Yeah.
so I have so this like I have so many questions about your takes on this. The main one though is I've heard a lot of people use similar ideas when they're describing the evolution of PF and debate events in general. You use the term like entropic, which seems to
Yeah.
imply to me like almost a sense of inevitability. Like this is just the way that debate works. Like as these technical formats evolve, they naturally sort of they reach higher and higher planes of esotericism, and the common audience is just completely left to the wayside. My question for you is, do you think that this is inevitable? And if so, why? And I guess like the underlying question behind all of this is like, what do you think drives this kind of trend?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so I guess I'll break it up. First thing I want to point out is I actually don't care about the common audience's ability to access debate. I don't think that's the argument against like the
Mhm.
entropy thing. I think the argument against the entropy thing is keeping the game, keeping the integrity of the game, right? Because the problem with like this entropic thing is that it creates a point where where it's just like a paradigm thing. It's like, how do you view debate, you know? And it's like you vote along this because you're a K judge or this because you're not, blah blah.
Mm.
The thing I think that's more relevant is like, A, why does it always happen? I think there's always strong competitive incentives, particularly in debate, where the entire game, in my opinion, is about time allocation. So, for example, if it takes you 4 minutes to win the round with a post-fiat ballot and it takes me 15 seconds to win the round with a pre-fiat ballot, there's obvious strong competitive incentives to just go for, I don't know, what's 4 minutes divided by 15, that number of pre-fiat ballots, right? As opposed to one strong argument. And then the other thing is, I just think that like there's a coaching problem. Like you look at who coaches PF, a lot of these people were not traditional PF debaters. A lot of them are LD debaters, are policy debaters, who really are coaching the format not as like let's preserve public traditional public forum, but they're coaching it very much in terms of let's try to read a K on this topic because we think judges will vote for it, etc. And it's, I think, this sort of short-term strategic perspective where it's like maybe you'll pick up a few more ballots in the short term, but it's like if you look at what that does to the format in the long term, it's like, maybe not a net positive thing. And then in terms finally as to whether it's inevitable, I think this question is sort of like impossible for me to answer just because like it requires a lot of knowledge of future events that I don't have, right? Like I would say that there's a pretty good argument now that if you look at just like even normal sports in general, the same problem has happened. Like look at what has happened in soccer, for example, where there's much less emphasis on a team game, and now there's a greater emphasis on the individual physicality of players, right? Or you look at, for example, basketball. Like in many ways, basketball is almost like a broken game, right? In terms of how it's played, right? So it's like I do think that this is like a problem across games. It's a problem with like the modern world because we have so much information, so much democratization of information that we inevitably evolve strategies that are better at breaking the rules, right? And I do think that just across the board in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, we will see this interesting thing with human games, with chess and poker and soccer and debate and all of these things, where it's like, where do we go as a species once we've like sort of pushed it and gamified it as much as possible? Like, what is our true relationship to these games? Is our goal to play these games as efficiently as possible? Because that sort of leads us to this maybe like unsustainable place. Or is the goal to play the game as beautifully as possible? Do you know what I mean? And to create this sort of like a meta that fosters like long term, really clever competition. I don't know.
That's a really interesting last point. Say more about that. Like, what do you mean by play the game as beautifully as possible?
Oh, I don't know. So it's like I am someone who approaches debate from a very competitive standpoint. I think the reason debate is cool is because it is a unique competitive game, and I think that you only get to be great at it if you're competitive. That being said, I think that the way, how do I explain? I think there are sort of natural intuitive limits to what we should vote on as judges to maintain the integrity of the game. An example of this is like if you say ma 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 ma, so vote AF, and I don't respond to like the literal gibberish you say, and you extend it. There's a certain tech over truth way of thinking which says I should just vote AF on that argument. Um, and I think a lot of, to be completely honest, I think a lot of arguments now are indistinguishable from that. They're like a tagline, a link that does not link to the impact, and an impact that is utterly ridiculous with a card that was written by some like child on a blog, you know what I mean, in the Philippines, right? And then it's all pushed together and it's like, you've conceded this. And it's like, well, what have I actually conceded? So I think what I mean by like play the game beautifully is I think it's like we do need to take a step back and think it's like, okay, maybe there's a short-term advantage to me as a competitor leaning into those super spam heavy strategies. And I'm not saying don't do it. Do it to win. Winning is great. You can't argue with winning, right? But I am saying that it's like if your entire strategy evolves to be about that, you're evolving an unsustainable strategy. And to me, there are certain things that are like beautiful or like evergreen ways of playing debate. Like, for example, just like weighing, that will never go out of fashion. And even if you have sort of like marginal competitive disadvantages in certain matchups or in front of certain judges, learning to play that game that way will like be a long-term greater advantage to you. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
I would rather kids learn public forum as they learn Parley first without cards, develop this like infrastructure of critical thinking for like a year, learn to debate a ton of different topics for like a year, learn to incorporate philosophy into the topics, not just Prague for like a year, then add cards. Do you know what I mean? And then it's like always have an emphasis on Wang, never go for more than one or two ballots in final focus. Like all this kind of stuff is how I would do the activity if I could just coach a kid from like, cradle to grave, so to speak.
yeah,
What
yeah,
about
100%. I guess I worry that some of this is sort of structurally barred from being the norm because of the
you?
selection effects that you were talking about. Like the fact that some of these maybe not so beautiful, as you say, strategies are winning more. Like judges are in fact voting for them more. That means that those strategies, it's not just that they get incentivized, right? I think that there's just as much of a selection effect as there is like an incentive effect where yes, like people are shown this strategy and shown that it
Mhm.
wins, so they do it more. But also just like the fact that it wins more means that it happens more because those people like get to more rounds and then they go to more
Yeah, totally.
tournaments and then they like get to rounds in front of more people who see this and see that this is winning.
So my perspective on that is like twofold. Maybe my head's in the sand, but I think that a debater who successfully leverages traditional strategies would crush the field right now for a few reasons. I don't mean traditional like they can't do pre-fiat. Like I'm not saying like put like 2018 Mac back in like no prep and he'd be like a monster. No offense. What I am saying though is like someone like you who approaches debate that way can easily learn the technical tricks, It's hard it's easier to teach someone tricks than it is fundamentals. And so the way I think about this is really simple. Can the average or even 90 to 95% of PF judges correctly evaluate a very technical pre-fiat, post-fiat? There's 30 different independent issues. It all resolves questionably in two-minute speeches, pseudo spread at you by high schoolers. Is a judge going to evaluate that correctly most of the time? Probably not. Probably not most PF judges. Probably not even most good PF judges, because that's not what this format historically is. So, what team is going to win more? The team that calmly stands up, goes for one like theory ballot, and goes for one very clear explanation of why they win post fiat, versus the team that tries to go for four or five tricky things and explains them all poorly. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
think it's like I think one team wins there. Like I do think that there's an element of this similar to poker where it's like if everyone is playing the game a certain way, you are losing expected value by playing the game like they do in all instances, right? And deviating from the normal strategy will produce better outcomes in certain instances, I think.
Yeah, I
Also, just like,
agree.
let's be honest here, like judging post-COVID is horrible. Like even if you go to like Harvard, like and you go to like paneled out rounds and like as deep as semis and activities as technical as LD, it's very common to see one to two parents on the panel. So it's like, do you seriously think you are going to win like this? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
yeah. Like you're obviously leaving stuff on the table.
Yeah, 100%. I guess then the question is like if you are right, let's entertain this hypothetical for a second, and such a strategy would dominate the current meta, why do we not see that happening?
I think we will see it. Like without going like too much into stuff, like I know people who are coaching this way, who started coaching very recently, who have kids who are doing extraordinarily well above what most kids of that age are doing. I think the real test is whether or not we'll see this at the TOC, right? Because TOC is the gold standard of what high school debate is. And I think it's like we'll look at the TOC 3 years from now and ask, is that unrecognizable? Has it continued this trend of entropy? Or does it look a little closer to like 2018 when it was very fast, very technical, but very post fiat, very much about knowing the evidence, knowing the topic, good at weighing interactions? Time will tell, I guess. It's not that I don't think people are doing it. I just think it's like it'll take a few years for us to really see whether or not this idea works or not. But I do think there are people trying it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it seems like maybe it's more determined by like what kind of coaches are primarily teaching the top students.
Maybe, I mean, maybe it's because so doing APTA was weird because on one hand, it's like most of my peers, like you, for example, were coaching the top students because like APTA is like APTA in policy, right? That's where a lot of people, like especially APTA, like most of the people who were super good at PF, if they did debate in college, did APTA, right? So it's like on one hand, I was seeing the effect of coaching, but on the other hand, I was being shown that you don't need coaches to have like a full
Right.
integrity league or whatever. So maybe it has to do with coaches. That is sort of like the obvious culprit here because high schoolers are high schoolers, but I think they're high schooler debaters too. So I think it also has to do with what debaters, like which coaches they choose to hire, right? Like whether or not you want the like sort of policy coach judge or the parley judge, whether or not you want to try this strategy, whether or not you want to do it. Because the reality is, and again, people forget about this, is like most high schoolers don't have real coaches. The average debate coach is not a debate coach. They are a chaperone and they might and a program director, and that doesn't denigrate them in any way. These people are wonderful, they want to keep the activity moving, but they don't think about it in the structured gamified way, right? So it's like I do think it is up to students as well quite a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think to compound all of this, and this is the last point that I'll make before we move on.
Shoot.
Um, I feel like there's also a sort of aesthetic preference that's been built around maybe even like a status symbol kind of thing, where there's a glorification of strategies that are labeled technical, um, and
Yeah,
there's sort of a denigration of strategies that are labeled traditional. Um, and so I see that students themselves tend to gravitate toward things that seem more esoteric because there's sort of like a feeling of finally dominating debate when you understand like
totally.
the very edges of it and you master the fringes. And that naturally, I think, lends itself toward students sort of min-maxing toward technical strategies and away from what they see as basic like fundamentals.
Yeah, I think it's like I totally agree with what you're saying. I also think it's sort of what's the word? Not horseshoe. It's sort of like full circle, where it's like you start debating very slowly. You get super technical. Like certainly I had this experience. I know Perry also had this experience because I watched him adapt from like tricks progressive LD to like a parley format. But you get super technical. You're like, this is the shit, blah 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 blah. And then the better you get, you just start talking slower. And like I've seen so many people do this. It's not that I don't think you should learn the tricks. Like I think you should. I think technical debate is great. I think it's fascinating. I think it's one of the most interesting games out there. It's just I don't think you should have blinders on. And I think part of what you're talking about is the problem. It's just this like one size fits all, like I'll get more technical. That's what it means to be good. And it's like, no, at a certain point, learning to talk faster or learning more links into the same like thing is not like what makes you a better debater. It's just being a better critical thinker, being cleverer, being more strategic, right? And oftentimes, honestly, talking slower can like help yourself too. Like, so I don't know.
Yeah. Gosh, we sound like
I
such.
know that's like super reductive, but yeah.
Yeah, I hope no one who's watching this video is thinking like, wow, these people just hate technical debate. Like,
No,
obviously,
which would be funny, the irony. Because
yeah.
we got criticized so much, Mac, for different things, but we were always the argument like terrorists, as Perry would say on this
Yeah, oh, that's so
app at
true.
least.
So true. Um, but yeah, I think like probably we would both you would agree with this. Like there's wonderful stuff to be found in technical debate.
Mhm.
And like the most extremes, like I mean, I'm sure Perry will come on and talk about this for like an hour about how like wonderfully beautiful tricks can be as well. There's like there are diamonds in the rough, but the blinders analogy I think is a good one. Like I think people are only looking at those things and they're not putting them into the context of like the broader fundamentals that I think are super important.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I'll say about this is just like I think the word technical is being misapplied, right? Because
Sure.
like every skill in debate is a technical skill. Like very calm, like a very clear, persuasive explanation of an argument coupled with very good comparative weighing about why that argument is better than other arguments is an acutely technical skill, right? Like at the end of the day, it's not like some of us are playing like volleyball with our hands and some of us are talking. Like we're all talking. Like the medium of the sport is language, right? So it's like nothing is inherently more or less technical, right? It's all a question of how to use language precisely to achieve certain outcomes within the game, right? So it's like
100%.
weighing is like that too. Traditional debate is
Yeah.
technical debate. It's just like
Oh,
lay judges that screw over that idea
this
because
is
people
such
associate
a good
that
point.
way.
This actually made me think of something that I've been stewing over recently, which is that I think like the word technical being misapplied is this is true on a broader scale, and it sort of ties in with this whole like policyification of public
Mhm.
forum. I think one of the biggest problems that I have is that people are treating policy as if it is the one true debate when the technical models within policy are a collection of heuristics, right? Like that is all they originally claimed to be, but people are looking at them as if they are what debate is instead of
Yeah.
an approximation, one version that shows you something about debate. Like in reality, right? Like these are literally all just different imperfect models of something that can't ever be completely understood in a technical way. And okay, one example that I have that really I think exposes this is like in policy, when people write a DA, they have like a card for uniqueness, a card for the link, card
Hmm.
for the impact or whatever. And let's say the DA is like the econ DA. What do you think the uniqueness is? Like they say the economy is going to crash.
Economy does well now, it does poorly if you do this thing.
Right, exactly. But then what if they call it the stock market DA? Suddenly the uniqueness card is not econ good, it's stock market good. What if it's actually the war DA and the econ argument links into war? Then the uniqueness is now war is low right now. It goes higher in your world. And the crazy thing is, literally, people will only pick one. They will just have one uniqueness card. And then depending on what they arbitrarily name the DA, it will
Yeah, yeah.
so it's like
No, I know what you mean. Yeah, yeah. Like stuff has to be tagged super precisely to even be
right.
flow.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
the truth of the argument is you need all three, right? If your argument is the economy will get worse because the stock market does worse and that will cause a war, you need evidence that says the economy is good now, the stock market is good now, and war
Mm.
is low now, in order to have uniqueness for like all three components of the argument. But because people have been so blinded by this heuristic, they just like it's like a complete, almost like a clouding of an obscuring of how we actually
Yeah.
understand the technical intricacies of the argument because we're too reliant on this heuristic. And this is sort of a broader trend that I see in sort of not even just misapplying heuristics from policy, which happens way too often, but even like just worshiping the heuristics themselves as if they are
Yeah.
the endpoint.
Oh, that reminds me. Have you ever read A Canticle for Leibowitz? This novel, A Canticle for. This has been used by people as a metaphor in a variety of instances. But basically, long story short, this does relate. It's like there's a big nuclear apocalypse. It wipes out all life on Earth, basically, except for a few people. And hundreds of years later, they rebuild society and they discover science textbooks. And they worship the science textbooks like they're religious texts. They don't understand the scientific method, but they perform them like they're rituals and they achieve these scientific ends. I think it's sort of a similar thing where it's like obviously they're not doing science, right? Just because they're doing everything in the book. Because the way they're adhering to it is religious. There's no rhyme or like
Right.
reason, right? And that is an advantage. Maybe you're starting without a coach or like going debates. You sort of construct, to be clear, you had a coach. You had to like construct these ideas for yourself as opposed to just like sort of slavishly relying on certain standards. But
Yeah,
yeah.
100%. That's a wonderful analogy. Okay,
I
I
also just think like people are not willing to accept, but like different formats do things differently and better and worse. Like
yes.
no one format is the best format. Like I don't know, like I hate BP. I don't think it's real debate. I'll be the first to tell you that I genuinely think if you want to watch undergrad college students have the best possible debates about like dev econ and finance, BP blows the socks off of every other format. It's not even close. It is an insane level of technicality. And I say that as I don't even think you can describe that debate format as technical at all. But that like degree of like technical precision required to be good at that is comparable to the degree of technical precision required to be good at policy, for example. It's just totally different, you know.
Yeah.
LD, like good like pre-COVID, good LD like debaters were way better at Phil debate than any college student that I've met who just did college barley, to be honest. Like, it's pathetic, you know? So it's like we all gotta have a little more hubris here.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I feel like this sort of epistemic humility is missing from
Yeah.
the high school debate. Uh,
Yeah.
okay, I think we've beaten this question to the ground a little bit. So I'm going to move on to what is some advice that you would offer someone who is looking to get better at PF, if they're a
Better
beginner
at PM.
or if they have some experience already.
So first of all, my first advice would be find people who are better and more knowledgeable about the format than me to give you advice about it, right? Um, that being said, I guess I have like specific advice and then I have general advice. My like specific advice, like the biggest underutilized thing in PF, in my opinion, right now is Final Focus. There's been a lot of, even I've seen eighth graders who can spread a very word efficient rebuttal where they read your pre-written blocks, read analytic turns on the line by line, have perfect delineation between top level and line by line. That's a perfect rebuttal. That's a complete rebuttal, right? Like the format's in a very good place there. But it's once you get to summary and Final Focus, people just lose their brain. Like a good example of this is like if you have four conceded links into an auto win argument with a 2 minute speech, do not extend four links, extend one, and then explain why it's winning for 30 to seconds to a minute. You know what I mean? So it's like that's the biggest piece of advice I've given in practical settings, even to really, really good debaters that I've seen. And I'm like, I could never be good at that age. It's just like what you are not doing is you are not getting the final focus. You're not picking your shots. You are going for too many things, etc. So I think the biggest, most specific piece of advice I have is get really good at final focus. Get good at going for literally one argument. Think about the restrictions of the format more. That's the other thing I'll say. Like, don't think of PF as this generic debate format. It is not. It is PF. It is a 2 minute closing speech, a 2 minute closing speech. And some judges don't even think defense is sticky. So sometimes you also have to defend terminal defense, even if an argument is totally beaten. Do you know what I mean? So it's do you know what I mean? So it's like,
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I see what you're
yeah,
saying.
so it's like it doesn't matter if your partner like annihilated an argument. If they repeat it in
Right.
Final Focus and you have a certain judge, it's like you
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
go for three arguments. You can barely go for one argument because you also have to extend terminal defense on arguments you've already won, you know? So it's just like think really like honestly, and I stand by this, I think public forum is a game about one thing, and that's time allocation. I think the entire game is about time allocation. Pretty much it. That's the one thing I'll go for. The other thing I'll go is the complete reverse of that advice, which is a really good argument can reverse all of that. Do you know what I mean? And as I think, never be afraid. There's this idea in technical debate that you just go for whatever has the least ink on it. So there's a way of construing the previous advice where it's like, oh, it's all about time allocation. I did my time allocation good, and they drop argument 3C. So I'm going to go for 3C and extend it. But there are certain rounds where it does make sense to go for your first argument that they responded 5 times to, and you have 2 minutes, you better use it. You explain why if you win the argument you win the round, and then you just go through all five of their responses and explain why they're all beaten or way against them. Do you know? So it's
Yeah.
like those are the two types of final focuses to me. Both are very successful. Anything in the middle, in my opinion, is losing. You either do one or the other. You know, you go for a dropped argument, you explain very persuasively why it's winning. You go for an argument with an ink, you explain very persuasively why it's winning. You know, something in the middle, you go for both. Bah. Something in the middle, you go for too many arguments. Bah. That's my biggest piece of practical advice, probably.
Yeah, that's a good one. I feel like there's such a norm for going for arguments with less ink on them these days, which,
Mhm.
it makes sense, obviously.
Makes sense, totally.
I haven't seen enough people go like really like step up to the plate and defend their argument. The last time I saw a great example of this was actually my former APDA partner, Sai Karnati,
Mhm.
when he was debating PF as University KK. There's a great recording on YouTube of that partnership went for just one turn, like from
Yep,
second rebuttal, just conceded
that's it.
cases wrong. We're just gonna read one turn, and then obviously, like the people they were against, which was a very good team that ended up winning the TOC, they were like, "Oh, well, all we have to do is to beat this one argument." So they read seven responses, and then Sai stands up and just responds to each of the seven
All
responses.
seven of them, yeah.
And
Well,
it's
so
like,
this is what in my opinion, this is the single greatest lost skill in tech debate, and I'm sure Perry will confirm this. Like, I would bet you dollars to donuts, he'll say the exact same thing as me. People have this misconception. Perry and I suffered from this in APTA. People would see us do spammy stuff, and they would assume that we were just all spam, and that if they responded to everything, they'd be fine. But our preferred spot was not going for drops. It was going for one argument for 5.5 minutes in the PMR. That was almost always our strategy. So our gov strategy was Perry would read new offense in the MG. There'd be like 8 independent arguments to respond to. They might respond to all eight. I would just go for one for 5.5 minutes. And if you look at great tricks debaters, this is what they do too. What makes great tricks debaters great is not the rebuttal speech. And I know I'm using PF terms here. It's the final focus. It's the ability to take one argument, which is a little marginal and which is responded to 3 times, and to just win with that argument. Do you know what I mean? And
yeah,
this is where parlay comes in handy, in my opinion. It's like seeing argument interactions. Like logic, at the end of the day, this game is just logic. If one argument is logically the case that winning that argument precludes them from accessing their offense, short circuits their offense, turns their impact scenario. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, frames out their ballots. There's no reason not to just go for that argument. Do you know what I mean? Like,
right.
obviously, that's what you should go for. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's great advice. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
going to transition a little bit. So the next thing that I will ask you is a very juicy question. What would you say are your three biggest hot takes about debate in general?
I, I think you've probably heard the three, like at least three hot takes so far,
That's fair.
right?
That's fair.
I think the biggest hot take I'll have is that I think American debate has a massive ego problem. And I think American coaches have a huge ego problem. And I say this again, as an American coach, you will have people who are 40 or 50. They might have like a master's in education or something, but their whole experience with debate is coaching high schoolers doing PF. And they have this ridiculous complex where they think they know what's best for the format. They think they're the like smartest game in town. They're the best at breaking the format, blah, 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 blah. So it's like I think that you don't. I think my hottest take is I think it's impossible to understand debate until first of all you've done non-high school formats. Like I don't think you have a very like holistic perspective on it until you've branched out of like just PF, for example. But also to do just as many formats as possible. That doesn't mean commit competitive time to it, but it means like if your partner in high school did like policy, have lots of conversations with that person about what that format is like and their perspective on debate. Because I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. And there is important logical things to take away from tech debate that BP debaters don't get, and that, in my opinion, makes their way of doing debate make no sense. But there's also things to take away from BP debate that tech debaters don't get, and in my opinion, makes their way make no sense, right? And not to like be that guy or like plug, our favorite game, but I do think like APTA like is probably the only format where you can find alumni who you could get to coach BP and PF despite them not having done either. I think to me that's the hallmark of a good format that teaches you a more comprehensive understanding of debate. So that's my feedback. I think my hot take is everyone should do APTA as well. I also think my other hot take is I think the NSDA should is the huge push for Parley is good. I think the traditional formats are probably on the way out. My other hot take is 15 years from now, I think the most common like high school format in the US will be some sort of Parley, probably World Schools, possibly younger APTA, but we'll see. Um,
A lot of interesting hot takes to unpack there.
Those are the predictive ones. That's not the
Yeah.
normative one. There's like a bit of normative one and then some predictive ones. I don't know. More hot takes. I think debate is about time allocation. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. I
Oh,
guess
I also think debate is like the best thing you can do in high school, like intellectually. Like I do, like genuinely. Like if I ever have a kid, God forbid, then they have a three-pronged mind, body, soul approach, and the mind will be debate. That child will do debate. You understand? Like I think like it makes you a more holistic, intelligent person for sure.
what is
Like
the body and soul approach?
body is they will do sports, and soul is they will play an instrument. They won't read, of course. This undergirds all three of these. But that's my strategy.
Nice. I'm glad you have a plan.
Yeah.
And I think the first piece of advice is also quite great, right? Like, in order to implement this, like you were sort of talking about it from the perspective of someone who went through this in college,
Mhm.
but for people who are currently in high school, which is I think most of my audience, the way you can implement this is like if you have other people who do other kinds of debate on your team, you should go and talk with them. Like, there's too much siloing between different, like, oh, that's the policy kids, that's the PF kids, those are the LD kids. They don't talk with each
Yeah,
other. They're like friends, but like they don't really talk about debate because if the LD people talk with the policy kids, they're gonna get bullied for their format being worse than policy, whatever, right? We need to get past that, right? Like there is so much to be found from actually just discussing how debate works with people who come from completely different debate backgrounds with completely different perspectives about how it works because everyone can learn something new that challenges their assumptions in ways that are so productive that can help you break through and create those innovations that can help you win against the current metas. um,
totally.
and it's
Yeah,
just like
totally.
cool, right?
It is. Yeah. I think conceptually debate, like to me, I guess my final hot take is there are a lot of people, and I used to be one of those people who really enjoyed debate as a game they played, but didn't think of themselves as a debater or love the activity. I think having graduated, I can safely to say, like, I love debate back. I think it is like genuinely one, no, I'm not emphasizing this. Like, I think it is one of the coolest games that humankind has ever come up with. Like, there's no game where the act of playing the game changes the rules at the same time. There's nothing like that. And you think you can find games like that? Oh, all those games depend on secondary rules which ascribe meaning to the game change itself, right? So you can find a game that's like, oh, past X stage in the game, these rules change. That's not what debate is. It's like a Schrodinger's thing. It's like literally as you speak, it like the way you speak changes the rules and the nature of the game, you know? It's like it truly is a beautiful thing, you know? So I don't know. I think it's really cool. I think that's my final hot take is like I didn't feel this enough as a competitor, but trying to develop a philosophical understanding of debate is, in my opinion, really useful as well. Like, really, like I spent so much time asking this. Like, what does it mean to vote half? What does it mean for a judge to say one team has won the round? Like, not just like, oh, time that you drop this, blah, blah, blah. Like, what does that actually mean when you strip it down to like the actual sort of like logical essentials of what's going on here, right? So, I don't know. It's very interesting.
Yeah, right there with you. Well, this is a wonderful transition to the last set of questions that I have. And so to begin with, what do you think, like, how can you find meaning in debate? Why is debate valuable more than just W's and L's?
Okay, so this answer is probably colored by the fact that I graduated college and my whole life changed as anyone who graduates college. My whole life changed, like 6, 8 months ago. And one of the things Mac and I were talking about before this call is how the adult world doesn't really give you the same opportunities to push yourself or to feel competitive readily. If you are a elite high school or college debater, you have the chance to compete at the top level in the world at a game that is as complex and rich and breathtaking of a game as any sport, as any board game like chess, as any gambling game like poker, right? You get to be the top of that. You get to push formats. You get to be the person who like innovates and stuff. To me, that's why debate's fun. And I know there's more wholesome ways of answering that because it's like a lot of people never do reach the top, right? But to me, the most joy I drew from the game was that it was getting to be one of the people who was pushing the forefronts of what made good APDA in this case, right? It was getting to participate in the game at the highest possible level. That's what I think the joy is. And I think the sort of takeaway from that is like it's really easy, and the majority of people in high school do debate for college. That's fine. It'll probably help you quite a bit. It'll help you with personal skills and life skills quite a bit as well. But this activity will not give you anything that you do not work for outside of it. It won't get you into a college that you aren't working for separately. It won't make you smart if you're not already smart. Do you know what I mean? The only reason, in my opinion, the only good reason to do debate is because it's really fun. And I think the best way to get something out of it is to find it fun. And when you start thinking of tournaments as numbers, as, oh, I break or I don't break, it's not fun. Or it's this toady marker or not, it's not fun. When you start thinking of it in terms of like, ah, I dropped X number of rounds, it's not fun. When you start thinking of it in every single round as like this new puzzle and new game and new intellectual challenge, then it's the most fun in the world. Like, final, I know I've been blathering, but Mac, I think the moment that clicked for me when I started understanding debate and feeling like it was a fun activity that I wanted to do no matter what was junior year of college at the Brown Pro-Ams tournament when Tosca and I dropped into the down two in round three off of what was my opinion not a correct decision. And I remember going out into the hall before the decision and being like, we're gonna win. If we lose, it's for this specific reason because I didn't say this thing. And the RFT came back and it was like, you lose, and I guessed the reason correctly. And I remember being like, I've never felt good in the 1-2 before, but I just feel like I understand this game because I predicted why if we lost, we would lose, you know? And so it was like that was the moment it really clicked for me when I was like, damn, I just love this. I love guessing. I love like trying to figure out probabilistically how the round breaks down and then being correct even if we get screwed over, you know? So it's like, I don't know. That's to me how you enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't have said it better. This is gonna be crazy. Was that Michael?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
go. I don't know why. I feel like I have a knack for remembering random details of like other people's rounds back
I
at
can
like
tell you who we debated. I think one of the people doesn't do it anymore, but the other it was Yale, but yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And there was the
Uh,
witch motion, but yeah.
oh yeah, the oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Blast from the past. Okay. Yes, I mean I completely agree with you. It's funny,
Oh,
you're
yeah, go for it.
you're cut from the same thread, clearly, the same like ideological thread as Perry, because we were talking about the same thing earlier. The way he put it is he said playing the game of debate is kind of like playing a sport like football. You don't play football to get fit, like to build muscle.
Yes. Exactly.
it's like completely incidental to your, it's like nice, right? But that's not like the
Yeah.
reason for doing it. I think all of these things like better research skills and like getting into college are sort of the same way that I think about debate.
No, and that's why that's the difference between debate and like mock trial or model union. Like forget for a second my like personal opinions about what you get out because you definitely get way more intellectually from debate. It's like it's also just like you can't do mock trial as this complete game you can disappear into. You do it to get into law school and to practice certain legal skills. Like debate is not like that. There's no fucking debate or there's no debate grad school, you know what I mean? So it's like you sort of get this sort of thing. Yeah, whoops. Um
No, you're good. It doesn't matter.
yeah,
Um,
you can just
no,
yeah,
I agree. I agree. So last question then. Um, yeah, maybe I'll say this is the last question. I'll think about it. We'll see
sure.
where the conversation goes. Um, how can you avoid like burnout in debate? I think a lot of people in high school, when they do very high levels of competitive debate, like I see this all the time. Like by junior year, they're like, I hate this activity.
Okay, my first advice is have friends outside of debate. Most of my friends are non-debaters. There's nothing more like I like talking about debate. I like the activity. Mac, you know, we would talk about debate in totally inappropriate context. But there's nothing worse than like wanting to like unwind and being around people who are just like, like debate, 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 you know? So it's like have like non-debaters as your friends. Also, just like it gives you an ego check. Like seriously, like if you're like some like Tony running person and your whole world is surrounded by debate, you get into this idea that like it really matters if you like third the tournament versus winning the tournament. And it's like it doesn't, and no one cares. And being around people who don't care is really nice because it's like it's nice to be around your friends who like don't know you're really good. They just like encouraging you and they're like, "Oh gosh, Andrew, like you did well at debate. Like good job." You know? It's like, so it's like I don't know. I think having that connection to reality is really important. There's this great like Stephen King quote about why he puts his desk like he doesn't work at the nice desk, something like that, where he's like, I need to be reminded that like writing is like I forgot what it was, that like writing is a support system for life, not the other way around. And I think debate is sort of similar. Like debate is a support system for life, not the other way around, right? So live life first, debate second. That's my first thing. The other thing is like don't listen to what other people say. If doing 4 practice rounds on your Sunday is what you want to do, do it. I think that's less likely to lead to burnout than a world in which you're like, oh, I feel judged because people are making fun of me for being sweaty. No, just do it. Like no one actually cares. Do it. Do what you enjoy. One of the things I regret about college is not doing more debate. Like honestly, like if I could go back, I would have done more debate. So it's like don't go into it with this idea of like, oh, I'm gonna regret this. I'm gonna do blah. I'm gonna do. Don't overthink it. Like if you enjoy it and it's fun, just like do it. Two novices in particular come to mind from last year, but I spent so long telling people on the Bates team, it's just like, just don't overthink it. If you enjoy it, just do it. It doesn't have to be anything else. You can always quit later. Like, who cares? Yeah, I
True.
don't know. I know that's not great advice.
No,
Um,
I think that's lovely advice.
I guess the final thing I'll say, I guess the final thing I want to say, because I remember I've been thinking about this a lot in the context of APTA, because I've come back and judged it, but also PF. People forget it doesn't matter how technical the format is. Doesn't matter, literally. At the end of the day, whether or not you win or lose is a question of whether or not you have persuaded a reasonable person that your position is correct in the round. And that's where the pluralism idea comes in. Because most of your judges aren't hardcore PF heads. They might have done some PF or coached some PF, but they did LD in high school, or they did, BP in college, or they're a parent. You know what I mean? So it's like at the end of the day, your job is to take that reasonable person in that chair and get them to see the round a certain way and learning what words to use so that you're keying into their philosophical version of debate, not just yours, is not. And I used to think for the longest time this was like rhetoric or tricks. That is what debate is, though. It's like bridging the gap between these like mental islands in terms of how we conceive of the format, right? And it's good debaters are able to do that. They're able to take a policy judge and get them to vote on an argument that the judge hates. You know what I mean? Because they learn how to put the argument in language that judge wants to vote for. And that's sorry, final thing I'll explain, final thing I'll say, because it just keeps coming to mind, is that's the other biggest tip I would give to people in terms of actionable things to do is don't expect a judge to buy an argument just because they should. a lot of what good debaters get good at is making a judge feel comfortable voting on an argument. Like I saw a kid go for like an autocracy's good turn. Most judges won't vote on that worded a certain way. Do you know what I mean? But it's like if you learn to put your arguments in a way that makes them sound more appealing, judges don't feel bad about voting for them, so they vote for them. And a lot of like being technical or being good is about forcing judges to vote for your strategy. It's putting them in a position where they have to genuinely think to themselves, either I have to vote on this argument I hate, or I have to screw over this kid who's clearly the better debater. And sometimes you do get screwed, right? That's the sort of disadvantage of taking these sort of strategies. But most of the time you don't. Yeah.
That's so true. I think if there's one thing I would say that makes the difference between a good debater and a great debater, it's just the way you can spin the argument in
Yeah.
the back half of the round, really. Like you were talking about
Yes.
final focus earlier, to make the judge comfortable voting for it. I
Yeah.
genuinely think like probably a good like 60% of the reason that I got better in college was because I learned how to like phrase things at the end of the round in a way that makes the judge want to vote for them.
Totally. PMR magic. Yeah.
100%,
It,
100%.
that's the, you'll see great like that's great APDA debaters are just so good at that. It's like insane. It's like and part of it is somewhat duplicitous. It's like an argument that was 2 words like half an hour ago is now like this 3 minute perfectly explained, mechanized, and weighed collapse, right? But it's like you gotta respect it. You gotta enjoy doing it, and that's how you win. Like final focus, yeah, straw from gold or gold from straw. You know what I mean?
100%, 100%. Well, Andrew, it has been a pleasure talking with you as
Likewise,
always.
as
Thank
always.
you for catching up, and thanks
Yes.
for agreeing to appear on the channel and dispensing your deep wisdom to all of the public.
Of well, yeah, I'm sure some of that happened. I certainly enjoyed it. It was really nice talking to you, Mac. Yeah, hopefully let's catch up soon in a non YouTube context.
For
But yeah.
sure, people should talk to their debate friends as people and not just debaters.
Oh
Okay,
yeah.
bye everyone.
Bye.